Hello, it's Graham Rollinson here on a sunny day in England in May 2013, and this is part 2 of a webinar for In2In organisation, and contact details will be provided at the end of this webinar. The webinar is basically on thinking about thinking, and in part 1 I covered things like multiplicity and how your thinking is like traffic in Paris. You are not in total control. Today I want to cover issues to do with who are you and who are you in relation to others, how this relates to left brain, right brain thinking in simplistic terms, and most important, how the context of your thinking should really be significant in how you are thinking about your thinking. Earlier this year there were a series of articles on ourselves, the nature of us, in the New Scientist 2013, and the first point they made was that much of our inner lives, from visual perception to memory, is little more than an elaborate construction of the mind. And what they say is that the self is really just another part of this illusion. We can ask, who am I? Yeah, okay. Where is the self? Where does it exist? It seems clear that the self is not just a useful illusion, but maybe a necessary one. How does the self exist within you? Well, it seems as if a good representation would be that the self is something that runs through our lives like a thread runs through a string of pearls. So it connects up different aspects of us, but the self itself is continually changing, is being modified by its experiences, and maybe, as I say, there are many selves. We are multiple selves as well. So in fact I would take the idea of thread of pearls, saying, well, actually there are several threads, maybe many threads. We could say that our self runs through other people's lives, so we are threaded through their lives, and in fact their threads are threaded through our lives, through ourselves. It's much more elaborate than we could ever have imagined a decade or so ago. Giving up this idea of our single self that is coherent and consistent all the way through our lives, as they say, is letting it go would mean really undoing the habit of a lifetime. Why do you exist? Well, you exist because yourself needs to be embedded in the self of others. I remember in my early training as a psychologist seeing a video, Elizabeth Newson, a specialist in autism. She showed a video of a young baby and its first few hours looking and exchanging eye contact with the baby's mother. And it was quite remarkable that clearly a conversation was going on. You could do video tracking to see that not only was the mother embedded in wanting to communicate with the baby, but the baby was embedded in the idea of seeking communication in another. So children are born wanting to be embedded in other people's lives, initially parents, which is pretty good. But we then develop this idea that our self is actually about us. We kind of grow up to think of ourselves as sort of individuals and separate from other people. And in fact, the research would suggest that your self is not so much about you, it's as much about other people and how we relate to other people. And Damasio calls it the social me. And there are profound implications for that the primary function of the self-identity is actually to build relationships. It's not to build ourselves. So we exist in order to be part of other people's lives. So all of us are part of the minds of others, and they are part of the minds of us. And the things we observe them do, other people do, things we hear them say, everything about other people is embedded in our lives, and how we are to other people, how we dress, how we walk, how we talk, the things we do and how we explain ourselves, those things are fully embedded in the minds of other people. And in fact, when we listen to somebody else, we find that we can only understand them well if we actually listen to the person that's inside ourselves, which is partly the other person. But that does have its downside, as Deborah Tannen mentions. So, what about our actual ability to choose? Where does that come in? If our selves are embedded in other people's selves and their selves are embedded in us, where are we, or where are we as individuals? Where am I as an individual in my ability to choose? And a useful question to ask is, in what situations would team brains work best, and in what situations do they work not so well? To continue with this, what I want to do is to have a look at some of the work of a guy called Ian McGilchrist, and he's done a lovely workshop talk at the RSA, and it's available online through the RSA Animate website series. And McGilchrist talks very interestingly about both hemispheres, and saying actually most of our actions, most of our mental events are integrated across both hemispheres. But there is some difference. There are some differences between the reasoning side, which is tending to be the left-hand side, and the intuitive side, the creative side, which is the right-hand side. And the right-hand side also is the holistic, whereas the left-hand side is the reductionist. And what McGilchrist talks about is how, depending on what you're doing, so it is context dependent, depending on what you're doing, you should be able to choose a necessary distance from the world. If you really are going to benefit, the context suggests you benefit from seeing things close up, then you really are going to look to reduce everything down to some small parts. But if you need to see things as a whole, if you need to see the big picture because it's complex, because it's collaborative and so on, then you need to stand back. And to some extent, the value of our left and right hemispheres is to be able to sort of move this perspective from going closer to going further away, but only if we allow us to have some sort of judgment as to whether we move in and look closer or whether we move out. If we just let each hemisphere do its own thing, then we may be looking at actually the incorrect distance from the world when judgments are made and decisions are the outcomes. So we have some differences. We have language and the way it classifies things. We have abstraction and the way abstraction actually gives us distance from things. We can decontextualize, or we can live directly in relation to what it is we immediately see. And the value in having these two hemispheres is the way in which they can talk to each other. Science is the process for assisting the left hemisphere, more so. And it is the people and their lives and their embedded function assists the right hemisphere function of decontextualizing and seeing the bigger picture. The right hemisphere, as McGilchrist says, yields a world of individual, changing, evolving, interconnected, implicit, incarnate living beings in the context of the lived world. That's a great advantage. But it all really depends on context. In the early eras, 6th century BC, McGilchrist makes the case that left and right hemispheres were pretty well balanced. Some reductionist approach is some formulation of civilized societies, but we're also talking about having holistic views of the world around us. What happened over the next centuries was, to some extent, the context changed. And as the context changed, then we tended to shift from a balance in our hemispheric functions to one where the left side was dominant. And in McGilchrist's book, very long book, 200 pages of references, I'm afraid, but he talks about how the master and his emissary, the master being the right hemisphere and the emissary being left hemisphere, analytical thinking, the emissary took over. And that was useful during a period of industrialization where our science progressed and our society made progress of one sort, but lots of other things were lost. And the context essentially that we should consider, I would suggest, in terms of left hemisphere function, right hemisphere function, in terms of how we should be individual selves or how we should be embedded selves, depends on this outcome of our thinking about whether our context is collaborative or competitive. Have we a complex outcome where the collaboration of other people is needed, or is competition enough to get the job done? If it's collaborative, then we must engage a lot of our intuitive right hemisphere function. And we must seek to embed our lives and embed our thinking in other people's thinking. If it's competitive, then analytical reductionist approaches might well win the day in the most useful way to gain the biggest steps forward. Other contexts, while there's risk, catalytic, get something wrong and everything goes wrong, are progressive. Things go slowly wrong, so you can use your intuition to get a sense of what is going on and to make adjustments accordingly. Are things truly complex? In which case, Gerd Gigerenzer in his book Gut Feelings indicates that complexity is best solved by an intuitive brain, and too much fact, too much reductionism results in very poor decision making. A lot of that is shown in the medical field. And finally, context varies in importance depending on stage of development of projects. In the early stages, really a lot of intuition, a lot of creative thinking with feeding of some reductionist thinking, really to stimulate the creativity. That's very useful. But later stages, because you come towards the end of a project, creativity can throw you off track, can stop you getting the completion that you're seeking. So in 16th century, that was all about industrialization and scientific development, and really the reductionist approach was dominant. Fragmentation was everything. So we had a pretty violent society as we attempted to solve all problems in the simplest possible way, often by going to war. But really, to discover the eternal truths, then the intuitive mind is the one we would want to turn to. And there are many, many statements by Albert Einstein as to how he was able to visualize a world which analysis would have suggested was quite ridiculous. So what next? Well, is the future our minds co-embedded with intelligent machine minds? There are certainly some people, including those who started the World Wide Web, who would think our Google lives, our social network lives, we're already embedded in the kind of machine intelligence that's out there. The machines are learning with us. Whether they'll take over, I don't know. So maybe we're already embedding our lives into the future of a coexistence of human and machine intelligent life. Is that exciting or is it scary? Don't know. Further reading, well, Rita Carter, Multiplicity, Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary, though you can see his animation, it's a YouTube animation as well, the rsa.org, the Animate series, and John O'Leary, you can hear him talk about How We Decide. Some excellent videos of him talking about his books, and the best one I think was the one in San Francisco. And here are the references. Team Brains is a webinar by Graham Ronson, and all comments please. If you have enjoyed and find this useful, please email me, graham@nextstepassociates.co.uk, and let's have a conversation about it. And you may be interested in my books, How to Advise the President, How to Invent Almost Anything, and Judgment Day, which, as I said in the first part, is a novel, but it's an interesting and easy read. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.